Well, shalomi homies. How are y'all doing today? I've got some just shotgun thoughts to try to send out your way when it comes to a couple of things. I went down some moderately conspiratorial rabbit holes recently. Not anything I don't spend a lot of time frequently. You know, to some people, introductory level conspiracy kind of rowdiness that's out there, you know, just basic things. You try to okay, full disclosure. I get caught up in conversations sometimes at the store because I'm hunting the souls of man. You know what I'm saying? Like, you never know. This could be the moment where this person suddenly questions something that's deeply ingrained into their life, like something they've never even considered questioning. You know, the store, grocery stores in particular, are like an amazing ambush point because you can potentially, if you're gentle, listen, if you can't bring people the truth without just being an absolute mean person about it, if you can't do it with like a genuine love or compassion, it's really generally not so beneficial. There's a time for sternness and strongness and saltiness when it comes to smacking people right upside the face with another level of the truth. But there's other times when you got to be delicate. There's times when you got to be like tender and gentle, you know, like all my mind just spiderwebs immediately to all the realities of trying to communicate gentility, of like instructing something into your children, you know, like each child is so different. Oh, I'm losing you. Hang in there. Bear with me. I threw this thing up while I had some sunlight. I was like, let's do this. I might have lost you entirely there. Hang in there. Yeah, you're all right. You're fine. Anyways, sorry about that. I'm just throwing this together because I had a moment. I'm like, sweet Moses of the Nile, the babies are sleeping. Oh, I got some hot tea. I love making hot tea. Like just the medicinal things that can come from your tea. You're like your choice of beverage. Like you got a lot of beverage temptations. You know what I'm saying? Like back to the grocery store. Let me stay focused. Back at the grocery store. You got all these options just screaming memes at you when it comes to the grocery store of like stuff they want you to buy and drink. Like just that. Just zoom in, take a second and just consider the potential pitfalls and the trappings of what's going on in that beverage aisle. You know what I'm saying? Like we are in a very different life now than our ancestors. And like because of that, like we are being predated upon by people that have a different level of cunning. And maybe not just as an inherent reality. Like there's always been cunning, shrewd people who like to eat up the poor like bread. You know what I'm saying? Who says like their teeth are long, like their fangs, their teeth have grown out like swords and they consume the people like bread. Like those people, those creepy vampire, cannibalistic kind of people, been around forever. The reality is they are a much more efficient, unified front of psychopathy. Like they are predating upon people at a potential pace that is just unparalleled through most of modern history, let alone into antiquity. Now, there was definitely the predator class for a long time when it came to those who devoured and ruled and dominated, the tyrannical leaders, you know, like dive into Gary Wayne's book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. I got the second one. Anyways, just to go through the history of the world through a very different lens. It's very valuable, highly advantageous. Those of you who have not considered studying history as it's been not so plainly given to the masses, I'd encourage it. Anyways, today we're gonna dive into some Game of Gods with Karl Tykarev because he's got some of the best. Man, he's like part philosopher and just apologeticist, you know what I'm saying? But like covert agent who snuck into the New World Order, like the actual like buy their own books, people that are like, yeah, we want a federal government. We want a world government. That's what we want. Like people that were all about that, like genuinely at their heart of hearts, they have gotten to a position in life where they have enough influence, power, persuasive capacity. They have a door that's open to them to try to peruse through the masses and find those that are like-minded and then unite under this ideological effort. That doesn't come from nothing. That doesn't just spawn spontaneously out of thin air. Like these are ideas, machinations that are in the heart of people who have a very different lens with which they see the world. And that lens allows them the capacity to distance themselves from mankind, from the humanness of people, the peopleness of people. Like they are separated from it because they've given themselves over to a dubious mind. You know, like when you go to the grocery store, things in America, for those of you that are foreigners in a different country, you're going to have a sincerely different experience with it because there's a lot of food that is fed to Americans and on our shelves that's illegal in many other parts of the rest of the world because even their rulers, their governments, to whatever degree, corrupt or not corrupt, they still saw the dangers of some of these food additives that are being put into the food. And they're like, listen, this stuff is super dangerous. Here in the United States, for instance, we have an approach from our Food and Drug Administration, right? These are the people that help to set a lot of the laws or the institutions, the statutes. They're the ones who have a lot of that over the food and drug side of the equation. As such, they have a policy, like an overall, like overarching idea of how we should govern that. And they have this idea called generally recognized as safe. Generally recognized as safe. So like, meaning when a chemical is produced by a company that wants to use it as a food additive, instead of going through a series of testings to prove that, yes, indeed, this is safe, it is considered the job of the person making and wanting to market and sell that product to the masses. It's their job to say, yes, this is good for people. We trust that you will do your own research and not bring anything to market that's going to be dangerous. So we know that you're going to do a good job at that. We'll let you decide. Whereas in other countries, consider the European Union, where people don't have that approach, where something that's going into the food that is going to be consumed by the masses, it must be proved to be safe. And there's a very big distinction in there. Like there is a chasm of food ingredients that are now the same. Like this is why Americans will go and travel over to Europe and they will eat food that they eat like over here that makes them kind of sick. And they go over there and they feel amazing. And they're like, what is the difference? And the difference is we have something hiding underneath the surface of our, especially in our more processed foods. We have other things hiding in this camouflage of delicatessen croissant. You know, like one of the, on our shelves, one of the more like precipitously, terrifyingly, health-wise ingredients, foods that's out there that we can, like, you wouldn't even think so. It's so unsuspecting. It's like those Pillsbury croissants, those quick oven-baked croissants. Like, inside those is a plethora of these kinds of additives and preservatives that have a serious toxicological effect in our bodies. But then you can go and get a croissant that's fresh made over in Europe, and you're going to be like, why does it taste nothing like the same? Why do I not feel the same? Not just the freshness, but it's all these other components that come into there that are catastrophically impactful in people's lives. And I was at the store talking to a guy, because our family's quirky. We are a peculiar folk. You know what I'm saying? Like, just full disclosure. We're spottable. We're kind of recognizable. This lady, this lady asked Chelsea today at the cash register, are y'all in karate? Now, granted, we're a bunch of Linenites, you know, like we look like we stepped out of a medieval Renaissance festival a lot of the times. I had all my gator tooth necklaces on and all this like crazy bobcat lion claws, and you know, like we're wearing babies, and we were like, no, you know, not doing karate. And she's like, you just all the white, you know, uniform. She thought it was like a white uniform. And you're like, oh yeah, like it'll spark a conversation because the guy next to her, she saw karate people. She didn't have much of a category for us. Whereas the other guy's like, you some kind of survivalist, you know, and like totally different set of conversations that him and I got to have after the fact, you know, because for us, it's like, we're looking for an opportunity to maybe drop some random pearl of wisdom. I believe inherently everybody I ever meet has pearls of wisdom in them. I don't care what they are into or been through, have done or going to do, have done. Everybody's got pearls of wisdom, whether they're like 2 months old to like literally on the edge of their 90s, like early centurions, you know, like crazy, incredible wisdom. Everybody's got pearls. And in life, so much of our quest should be to mine those pearls. Everywhere we go, any opportunity we have, just for what it's worth. Some of you guys are like, I would rather never talk to another person when I'm outside. I understand. I get it. But if you're kind of a spectacle of a person, you're going to have a lot of conversations. Or if you're trying to kind of maybe fish for people's souls a little bit, you know what I'm saying? Just trying to snatch somebody out of some level of despair that they could be in, bondage and discouragement. Well, this guy and I start up a conversation about like different ways that we've lived, which is kind of eclectic, kind of bizarre and out there. But he was genuinely hungry. And we started talking about food. We started talking about bread. We started talking about fresh milled bread, you know, because I'm just like, oh, bro, let me just give you a different paradigm. Because Chelsea and I were reflecting on what are some of the things that made us, so much of our life revolves around cooking fresh meals. Like almost every meal that we eat is centralized around freshly made, and then that means there's a major change up. You freshly mill your own grain. If you've never even heard of it, we have a whole video series. It's called Becoming a Millenite. It's epic. It's epic because we had never considered so much of the anti-grain, anti-gluten movement out there was neglecting the reality of what could happen when you grind the grain fresh. Just that simple step versus sifted bread, sifted white flours, enriched, bleached. Here in America, we got bleach white flour. That's the main thing that goes into so much of our food and our diet. And so we've inherited a very different version of what it does to our bodies, and we've not looked at it the same way. But when we started grinding our own fresh grains, we started doing things at home that otherwise, you can go to the store and buy pancakes, or you can fresh mill them yourself with organic grain for cheap, like legitimately pretty stinking cheap. You can eat a much more quality, nutrient-dense diet cheaper by freshly making it at home. That's an obvious thing, but it's even more so when you're using bulk ingredients. Like you can buy a 50-pound bag of grain, and that can last you for a decent size. For some of you guys, you're like, bro, we polish off a bag of grain every month. I like it. Big families. Anyways, it quells the appetite. These are ways that we started learning all of these catastrophically toxic stuff that was going into our bodies because we were sick. We were not super well. We felt like we were diminished down to this capacity of potential that was so much lower than what we'd had when we were younger. And we're like, what is going on? So we started researching. And we launched down all these rabbit holes. And some of you guys have already been well down there. You know what I'm saying? Going into ultra processed foods, just diving into that and how these things are made and engineered by the very same kinds of scientists that were engineering drugs and chemicals to lay a population into consumerism, that they would be consumers of this substance continually. Whether that was, a lot of that was in the tobacco industry where they're engineering different things to tweak and augment these cigarettes or tobacco products so that they could make people want it more. A manipulation of addictions is one of the main tenets, one of the main strongholds in our food industry. Finding a way, not just food industry too, and entertainment, all these areas are trying to grab a hold of people and change them so that they are dependent upon that substance, that thing, to keep them coming back for more and more and more and more, relentlessly. That feeling and that cravings are literally being weaponized in such a strategic and powerful way that it consumes people's lives, their relationships, their health, their wellness, to where we spend in our country, almost a third of our entire governmental budget just trying to deal with the health issues of what's going on, because it's created this waterfall of toxic people that are inherently ill, and then are offered the solutions from similarly wired drug manufacturers to try to alleviate symptoms. This guy today was telling us he needs a new liver, and it's brutal. Brutal. He's waiting. He's literally committed himself to basically, I'm going to die unless I get a liver, and it's the long-term effects of these choices, these actions that we have in our life play out later on, and it's they become very, very pressing. You immediately are thinking about your life in a totally different way when your health starts to go out and you're starting to be willing to grasp at any option out there. I'll try anything. But to refocus for us, we are well, what's one of the more navigable things that we can do? And it was well, let's make a change to our diet. Let's make a change to our diet because that's something we are reintroducing potentially beneficial things into our body on a regular basis or things that are less beneficial. And we are in this wrestling match trying to steer ourselves away from it. And it was really hard to do when it was just eat clean, eat organic, eat better quality, it was this gradient effect for us, eating farm fresh, eating meeting the farmers. Then it was we got to a place where we're living with farmers, we're living on the farm. Now we are the farmers. There was this transitionary effect, a waterfall effect in my family's life because we began to become aware of what's actually going on behind the scenes. But as long as we were ignorant, as long as we were, on one side, voluntarily choosing to ignore the idea, the evidence, as long as we were like that, we stayed on this totally different course through our life. And that course would have kept us in relationship with a lot of other people, because so much of the culture that I have around me and is going out to eat or eating to go, fast food, quick food, grabbable food, that's a huge part of the culture. And when you suddenly shrink back and you separate yourself from that, it changes relationships. And it sounds silly, but it's reality. It'll actually change your relationships. Just you now being person who makes the food versus the people that just go and buy the food. It's very different. It's very different. It changes so many little ripple effects in your life. Those of you that are single right now and you're a young man, you're a young woman, you're considering how to navigate your life, learning how to cook food for yourself, high quality, nutrition rich food for yourself is a legitimate, valuable skill that is not taught to you. We are given education and a form of schooling throughout our life. And at no point in time growing up, in any of my schooling, was there, here's how to cook and eat well. Like excellent food, how to pick ingredients that are beneficial for your body, how to sift through the stuff that's not beneficial. Like of any of these things, these skills that we could have been given, why that one was shielded from us. Unless you grew up in a family or a home where that was elevated and your family was diligent and different from the norm. This used to be the way that families were a few generations ago. And now we are so disinherited from our history, from our ancestry, from our familial past and the echoes of what made people. And it's impacting us drastically. But my contention is it's not something that just came about spontaneously. This wasn't just an effort that was made tangentially, but this, in my contention, is the end game. The end goal of so many of the predatorial classes is to devour the people from off the earth, to turn them so far away from autonomous, from entrepreneurial, from self-starters, from self-capable people, that they would be dependent people only. And that level of, that two differences of man or of woman that's expressed when somebody is capable versus somebody that is dependent is drastically noticeable. And it's far easier to control a population that doesn't have that wherewithal, that doesn't have the grit of overcoming challenges and overcoming obstacles. And it makes them more plugged into that system. And it makes them readily able to receive whatever dogma, ideology, brainwashing is being force-fed alongside it. You know, because there's a reason what's incentivized to be cheap and available and readily available and accessible is cheap and readily available and accessible, and other things are not. You know, like food prices, how much our government in our country steers what is made and grown as food through what kind of givebacks and kickbacks and reward or demand promissory buyback programs are in place that's steering the entire massive food production of our country. And because of that, the food industry that profits off of it, you know, but then there's these these cascades of effects that come after the fact that are otherwise unknown, maybe for months or years or decades, but eventually they're borne out. They're borne out. Like one idea, consider. At the facility in the Midwest where they're processing a lot of the bulk ingredients from corn or wheat or soy, and they're making products out of it, okay? One of the big off products of that is carbon dioxide gas. And so a solution was to pipe that gas, compress it, and turn it into like literally more like a liquid almost, like incredibly high concentrations, ultra concentrated carbon dioxide, and then pump it to another place and dump it down into the ground. Well, what can happen, side effect, shocker, is if a pipeline like that bursts or leaks, you have high pressure, massive main that erupts with a odorless, generally, gas that is heavier than air and displaces oxygen. So what you have is people living on their properties, their farms, who are suffocating to death in their house because there's no there's no oxygen available. They get saturated with carbon dioxide and they suffocate. If a car drives into these giant clouds, we're talking just filling acres of land sitting down on the ground, cars that drive into it are going to shut off. They can't access that area. So you got people on the inside calling 911, asking for help. They're having some kind of horrible reaction. They don't know what's going on. The ambulance tries to drive in there. They drive into the carbon dioxide rich environment. Their vehicle shuts down. They all go unconscious. They'll be dead in a matter of minutes if they're not pulled out. So it's this crazy cascade effect from something that upchain is not even on the radar, like otherwise being told as generally recognized as safe, right? Sign right here, generally recognized as safe. The problem is it's not. And the problem is you can't hold somebody, an individual, accountable for those kinds of consequences when it's become this bureaucratic mess. But my contention is the more that we arm ourselves with an understanding of what's going on out there, especially on things that so drastically impact our lives, impact our well-being, like we need to know how to navigate those situations. It's great. Hold on a second. I got elderflower in here, elderberry. Comfrey. For those of you that are going to ask, somebody else, I don't care. It's fine. This is my medicine, son. I made it at home. Oat straw. It's like legitimately, I am absolutely certainly convinced There are incredible benefits from these amazing little plants around us. I grew comfrey. It's harvested it, put it in here as well. I got stinging nettle, stingy, but delicious. It's a hearty meal. Elderflower, so good. I love it. And mulberry leaf. I love white mulberry leaf. I collect it in the summer. It's like my jam. It quenches thirst. Way better than Gatorade. Gosh dang it, Gatorade. That's one of those. You know what I'm saying? Like, it says quenches the thirst. No, like literally, look it up. Native American remedies for thirst. White mulberry leaf tea. Bam! And you're like, dang, what's going on with that? People aren't messing around. It's something fantastic. But we're going to circle around here to the cult of the world order, shall we? Let's dive in. It's going to be adventurous. Excuse me. Excuse me, ma'am. How dare you? How dare you? For those of you that aren't familiar, I've talked about this book quite a few times. There's a series that I have on my playlist called War of the Ages. I go into a way bit more about this. Carl Teichrich's book always spawns all kinds of crazy, amazing ideas and thoughts in my head, and I never get past a couple chapters or two at a time when I'm talking about it because it's rich and dense, and it's much more akin to like a textbook style, like fantastic read, but it's also very meaty. Like, you better be ready for it, son, because you're going to get into the minutia of all these different ideologies. Like, where's the origin story for the bad guys? You know, like, we should know that because there's this, like, reference in the scriptures for what it's worth. And we'll go there too later. But in 2 Corinthians, when he's talking about we are not ignorant of the schemes of the devil. That's like, we won't fall prey to him if we're not ignorant of his methods. But if we are ignorant of his methods, if we're ignorant of the darkness, if we're ignorant of it, we are left to become prey to it and predated upon by it. So the contention is not spend all your time always studying the enemy's camp. Spend some time studying it so you can identify it and learn how to navigate it, and then learn the methods to overcome it, right? Because you got to understand the ways of the serpents, you know, these people that are crooked. But you also need to know that you walk a narrow and innocent or straightforward path. That's the trajectory in life that he's calling us to, a different standard. So this is the chapter 11, the cult of world order. So listen, this is going to be going into an understanding of what these people believe that came to this place of understanding of how to take up and create world governance systems. And I quote, 50 years is ample time in which to change the world and its people almost beyond recognition. All that's required for the task are a sound knowledge of social engineering, a clear sight of the intended goal, and power. End quote. Arthur C. Clarke from Childhood's End. Quote, well, we are gods now. Gods in charge of our own destiny, and gods can't be capricious. Maurice Strong, from where on earth are we going? The old world is dead. Let the new one arise from its ashes. Arise, the new world order shall, from Haridas T. Muzmabdar. Another quote. World crisis and world chaos cannot be successfully handled in the absence of world authority. Scott Nearing. These are some of those players along the way. Which organization are you representing? None, I answered. I'm individually accredited. The gentleman's eyebrows went up. I was an anomaly. He's sneaking in. My surroundings were surreal. Gazing into the domed space above me, it appeared I was sitting in a giant, inverted bowl. The vast ceiling resembled something out of a science fiction movie with a saucer-like center and concentric rings of lights. Along the two side walls, double rows of darkened windows looked down on the milling crowd. Immediately to my front, past the two-tiered marble podium, was an iconic gold leaf wall, shimmering with the reflecting glow of overhead lights. An imposing backdrop for the enormous emblem of world unity that hung among us. There we were in our suits and ties, sitting together in the middle of the United Nations General Assembly Hall, surrounded by almost 1,400 participants from around the world, each, with the exception of a few dozen people, officially representing a civil society organization or international agency. We gathered under the banner of We the Peoples, the title of the UN General Secretary's rallying report. We had assembled to birth a new order for the new millennium. Do you know anybody here? I countered, noticing my table partner was representing a government entity. No, do you? Earlier in the day, I'd recognized a few faces behind the registration table as members of the World Federalist Association and briefly interacted with them. "If you have any problems with your paperwork," explained an attendant, who I knew to be a World Federalist, "just come back and we'll take care of it." With a reassuring nod, he handed me some forms to fill out. We're running the show. After passing security and entering the General Assembly, I had noticed other WFA personalities lingering near the front hall. These were people I'd encountered at meetings in Washington, D.C. and Chicago, but I could not honestly say I knew them. After all, I was attending the United Nations Millennial Forum as an independent participant. "I recognize a few people," I said to my companion, "but nobody I know." The gentleman nodded at my answer, and there we were, two strangers surrounded by strangers in the symbolic nerve center of global fraternity. But in a matter of seconds, I looked to be the liar. With the words barely out of my mouth, a young professional who was familiar to me as a World Federalist marched from the front of the auditorium and stopped at our desk. "Carl, we have VIP seats up front. There's a spot reserved for you." What could I say? I gathered my belongings and, under the glare of my now former table partner, made my way to the front of the General Assembly. Establishing a new pathway. Attending the United Nations Millennial Forum was an opportunity to intimately witness how world order was being envisioned for the 21st century. Setting this event apart from other UN millennial meetings was its composition. Instead of stacking the forum with governmental representation, it was geared to a civil society. Accredited non-government organizations. This was keeping with UN Secretary General's 1997 call for People's Assembly. It is important to note that the NGOs encompass a range of organizations and interests. Generally, any nonprofit and non-government body can fit the category of an NGO. This can include charity groups, faith-based and humanitarian agencies, special interest societies and associations, foundations, and think tanks. However, in the context of the international community, NGOs usually refer to civil society organizations that are accredited to the United Nations, agreeing with its principles and have a stake in global narrative. Even here, the differences were observable. Some groups convey a benign platform, like the World Association of Girl Guides or Girl Scouts, which was accredited to the UNMF. On the other hand, other entities, such as the Lucius Trust Foundation and the Institute for Planetary Synthesis, financial contributors to the forum, openly frame global oneness through occult philosophy. Pause. For those of you that are not familiar with the Lucius Trust, it used to be called the Lucifer Trust, and it is a established printing press, media group in a sense now, organization that has been motivated and financially benefited by the founders of an older religious order, the New World Orders, Theosophy was the Helena Blavatsky, kind of the origin stories for a lot of that organization. Others that carried that on, we've read about them in the past on other episodes of this that we can talk about. This is one of their representative groups, and they're the ones financing some of these things. So just so you guys catch up with something that he was saying there. Others work to advance political regionalism, like the Union of European Federalists and the Spinelli Group. Some lobby for an even larger change. The World Citizen Foundation is one example. Another is the World Federalist Association, since renamed Citizens for Global Solutions, and its umbrella organization, the World Federalist Movement. For our context, NGOs are non-government pressure groups pushing for national change to follow a prescribed global narrative. And in many ways, we would relate this to our lobbyists, because in order to enact changes that are favorable towards like the food additives organizations or those companies, they pressure people that are in positions to change or influence laws through lobbying groups so that they can persuade them to uphold agendas that are favorable to their condition. Same type of mechanisms being deployed here, just different verbiage. UN partnering with civil society is an important part of world order development. It allows new voices and visions to permeate into an otherwise bureaucratic environment. Moreover, NGOs act as apostles for the world body, disseminating the global narrative into national and local dialogues. At the same time, NGOs gain stature, visibility, and reach. Their special interests are authenticated. It's a mutually reinforcing relationship. Unlike governments, most NGOs are seen as detached from partisan influences, and are portrayed as untainted by party politics and corporate powers. Championed by cultural influencers, a persona emerges. We hold the moral high ground. That's the persona. The NGO community is thus upheld as an arbiter of social legitimacy and a voice of the global consciousness. In saying the above, I must be noted that mundane and practical consultations between international agencies, governments, and certain NGOs happens on a daily basis. I have friends who've been involved in this capacity in dealing with routine matters of business, diplomacy, sometimes working through complex situations. There is need for a neutral space where multiplayer concerns can be discussed and resolved. We do live in a global world, a fact that should compel national powers to seek sensible, wise, and mutually beneficial exchanges. However, the NGO United Nations interplay at the United Nations Millennial Forum was geared to something more transformational, more profound, the visionary construction of futures. We gathered to remake the world in our image. Key language here. Gathering the world to make it into their image. This is important, okay? Because this is an idea. I want you to understand when we read modern language of what's being used to describe the agendas of global powers, understand that these same ideas, these same spiritual tenets and pressings and passions and drives and motivations have been around for a long time. World governments happened in the past on massive scales, of which most of us are not really informed about. We're not given an accurate lens through to see history as it really was. But there's times when the world was unified under global government before. And they had an ideology that permeates it. And it's the same spiritual ideology that permeates this that's calling for its resurrection, for the bringing of it back. If you go to Genesis 9 here, back to the beginning for a minute. Some of you guys are going to watch this later on and not know what Bible I'm reading from, so I'll just pass that on. This is called the Scriptures Translation, ISR, Institute for Scripture Research. This is, I did the entire audio recording from the Scriptures. I absolutely enjoy it. It's one of my favorites. But just so you all know, if you go into, here we go. 10. They don't even make it a chapter out of coming out of the ark. It's savage. No more. Here we go. Chapter 11. You betcha. And all the earth had one language and one speech. And it came to be as they set out from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to each other, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, and make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered all over the face of the earth." Establishing a name for themselves, right? Uniting themselves under one name, one idea, one complete conviction, identity, a complete identity and oneness. Then Yahuwah came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And Yahuwah said, "Look, they are a people, and all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. And now they're going to do what will now? And now they are not going to be withheld from doing whatever they plan to do. Come, let us go there and confuse their language, so that they do not understand one another's speech." And Yahuwah scattered them from there and over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. That's why its name was called Babel, because there Yahuwah confused the language of all the earth, and Yah scattered them over all the face of the earth. They had an idea to unite themselves under one religious ethos, and this is the mystery religions. Understand the identity that bound them together is much more akin to mysticism, the mysteries. This is like this is what we were getting back at with Helena Blavatsky and the style and the approach of what today we would use more of descriptions of things like New Age or transcendentalism, like people that are transhumanism, these other things that are trying to seek to escape the bonds of normalcy and escape to these other realms and bring unity to all people through a collectivism. That idea is what is permeating much of the culture, the spiritual and social milieu that's germinating and bringing to life these ideas of these groups that are laboring towards this cohesive agenda. But then they're launching their apostles out to re-engineer society, to get it to come back to this place of reunification. Because when there was the confusing of languages at Babel, there was a division over the principalities that governed the spiritual realms of mankind were divided. When they were divided, I should read it to you, because some of you are going to be like, what are you talking about, dude? Just for random insert here. Deuteronomy 32. For what it's worth. He's doing a summary of the times. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the children of Elohim. Like, this is before the days of Abraham. This is before the days of Israel's establishment. Some translations will say Israel right there, the sons of Israel. Some will say the sons of Elohim. The oldest texts say the sons of Elohim. They're talking about the sons of God, like these immortal watchers that rule and govern over society. They have a spiritual right to rule over different distinct boundary zones. And that can get changed. That we talked about this more in the volunteering for the minefield stuff. That can get changed and it can get altered. But when those inheritances, when that spiritual hierarchy changes, is as the people enact and follow the wills that fuel it. This is why people are like, yeah, you got to worship the gods. You got to go to the temple. You got to do these specific sacrifices so that Hades or Thor, or these different gods will be able to hear your voice. Like they were re-empowering the spiritual and physical forces on the land, the ambassadors there. Well, today, we've grown up in a society that disinherited spirituality by and far. They've disinherited and gone to the scientific, academic, like science is God, religious ethos. But then there's others who had a totally different approach, who had a very different approach where they are like, no, we're going to embrace and we're going to mix these together. We're going to combine these together and create a unity of ideas and science, of mystery and science, that we can combine them together. And that's what you'll see so many of the echoes or the tendrils of that bursting out now. The forum is more than a week long. We're going to jump back into this. The forum is more than a week-long meeting. Oh, just pause. Let me explain one more thing. What happened at the tower was the people were united under Nimrod, right, and Ishtar. These were the two gods that were being exalted, people that were being exalted and lifted up as the gods. When they worshiped, the way they worshiped, how they put it all together to do this magical workings was scattered and broken as the languages were confused. That religion was scattered. There's been a massive collective focus to try to regather the lost wisdom. This is what a lot of Gnosticism is seeking to do, is to deliverance, healing, ascension, resurrection even, they believe comes through secret knowledge, the restoration or the gold, the hoarding up and the utilization of weaponized secret knowledge. That's what much of these ideologies are pursuing and endeavoring towards. So at the time of that scattering, though, it was destroyed, and now there's this deep emphasis to try to regather it, and they're becoming more unified in their effects on doing that, on accomplishing it. The forum is more than a week-long meeting at the United Nations. Alderam explains, we believe it holds out the prospect of establishing a new pathway. A few minutes later, as this new millennium begins, we are all coming to realize that in our diversity, we are one human family. The only way we can survive the challenges ahead is to stand together. In this regard, we have no choice but to follow this path of global inclusion and to recognize and affirm our essential oneness. We are one human family, all stemming from an original human couple. Christians, therefore, should be the least racist group on earth, for the biblical position is that we are all one human race, emanating from a common beginning through Adam and Eve. But Aharam here was suggesting something more planetizing, political conformity to an idealized enchantment. That about captures the summation of much of this book. The political conformity to an idealized enchantment, the re-enchanting of man. Referencing United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan's report, We the Peoples, Adoram told the crowd, the Secretary General, in his report to the Millennium Assembly, has also clearly appreciated and articulated the need for a bold new vision of global inclusion based on the recognition of our interdependence and oneness. For this, above all else, we applaud him." End quote. Anand's document did not specify oneness, but Araram understood the UN Secretary's general context. After Araram took his seat, Kofi Annan addressed the assembly. "You have understood that problems without passports requires blueprints without borders. We can in fact safely say that the NGO revolution is one of the happier consequences of what has defined our age, globalization. Herein lies the important factor. NGOs can initiate awareness campaigns and social movements and thus compel national governments to translate global ideas into local actions. When multiple and diverse NGOs all lobby for the same thing, pressuring governments and targeting key groups, even employing strategic exaggeration as an issue attention tactic, the perception of public interest is politically magnified. A multiplier effect comes into play, and the issue moves into an actionable phase. At the United Nations Millennial Forum, the NGO community celebrated this rising collective power, recognizing themselves as the revolutionary third force in shaping society. It was a heady experience. The thematic elements of the groups were anointed visions, articulated the political application of oneness. In my group, subgroup 6, strengthening and democratizing the UN and other international organizations, which was dominated by the World Federalist movements and its American branch, the WFA. These were the major points discussed. So this is how they go from, we're gathering together right now. This is the meeting of the leadership. And they've got an idea on how they want to advance this agenda another notch forward, because they wouldn't have to take these same tactics to infiltrate society as a total world power unless they knew that these ideas are not ideal and not favorable and not going to be readily digested or accepted by many people. So they've got change influencers. They've got to localize their ability to accelerate the agenda wherever they are. And they need people that are locally fit to do that in their terrain. And so this pressure, where you'll see this, if you guys have watched, if you look back, Carl's writing about a time he sat down in the early 2000s, like right at the beginning of the year. And he sat down with people that formulated how they were going to get people to go along with certain agendas. They did this groundwork decades ago so that later on that could come to the fruition. That would start, the fruit of that would be borne out. We're now living in a time after the fact where many of these agendas have gone out. But I sit here and when I read stuff like this, I see how capable and efficient people can be when rallied behind a similar set of values and ideas and beliefs. They can be so effective at taking that and spreading it around and creating the potential for change. This is an amazing thing. This is an amazing, beautiful thing. It can be weaponized for great evil and for great harm and for great destruction, but it can be weaponized for great good. The same thing that's in the heart of all men. When we get excited about something that's made a difference in our life, like we want to talk about it, we want to share with other people about this thing because it's helped us or it's made a difference and an impact in a beneficial way, or when we're really upset about something. We want to tell people about that too, sometimes way more so. Like when somebody did something real wrong, like customer service problem, way they handled this was terrible. You want to tell a lot more people than when you want to tell them about the good. You know what I'm saying? You guys get it. But I can sit here as my own little family who somebody shared with us this idea about fresh milling our own bread. Just that. Just take it, get an electric grain mill, buy some organic grain, grind it up, make your food. Do it that way. We didn't know much about making bread. Didn't. My wife now can bake bread like nobody's business. She can make muffins and biscuits and cookies and cinnamon rolls and waffles and muffins and all this different stuff. It's awesome. I generally make tortillas and biscuits. They're easy. They're easy and they're pretty foolproof. You can't really jack it up too much. But bro, you eat some of this and you're like, I feel so much better. I'm so satisfied. And it's it literally contributes to your mental health, your mental clarity, your awake, your alertness, your body's ability to process these things. When you give it good quality nutrients, fresh homemade stuff, you're like, wow, I feel so much better. Versus that exhaustion and fatigue that you feel after finishing other meals and you're like, oh, I feel worse than I've felt before. these things are like drastically changing our life. So we tell everybody about it. We're like, we're going to tell everybody we can about this thing. It's been a major influence of our life. It's made us be so much more passionate about stuff that we otherwise wouldn't. So I'm telling people about it. Well, these people are bought hook, line, and sinker, sold in to creating a world order. Like they are 100% committed to their beliefs and their ideologies in many ways, that this is the cure. Because listen, they are dealing with, for many of them, are dealing with similar constraints of seeing things get out of control in their life, or the life of the people around them, or the world as a whole. And they are seeing the world through this lens. And then somebody's come along and shown them this is the options. These are the alternative choices that we have. And to try to go about changing the world through this approach is the way that we do it, where we enact our changes on people, even if they don't like it. We're going to rule things illegal so that we can modify people's behavior, so you can't have this anymore. It's brutal. It's a brutal reality that it can go down that road. But listen, I see these people also as zealots. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you always want to recruit the zealots, people that are so diehard, so passionate about their beliefs, like so committed to the cause that they're willing to go to this level of like volunteering or full dedication and commitment. These people are really radical. They're really devoted to what they believe in. And if they can be that devoted for something that I would say is adversarial towards the benefit of the unique expression of mankind and their future as a whole, people-wise, I think that's a very adversarial system. However, if we can convert them to come over to this side and understand there's a totally different option of restoration and healing, and of families and communities and relationships being these regenerative, restored things. If we can go back to cultivating the values of family, of morality, of ethics, of truly things that govern society successfully for a long time. If we can understand the value of these things and get people to commit themselves to it, it changes people's lives. And we're totally convinced of it. And you know, the more I see behind the veil of the methods and the plotting and the planning of the other side, it makes me readily cognizant of how these things have played out for so many of us time and again. We've just never sat at such a precipice where the capacity for that kind of change was at its highest, but we certainly are. Check this out. Here's some of that influence and how we get some of that freedom. This is in the book of Colossians. If you guys haven't read this one, I challenge you to read it. It's shortish. It's pretty short. It's a couple pages. You could knock out this book in a few minutes. Like a few minutes. Just something to consider. Something to consider. Make a daily discipline in your life and change it. Make a small structure in your life where you have a discipline. Reading a few chapters of the scriptures every single day will get you through it in a year. 3 chapters a day. Those of you that can sit down with your family, your children, like having a discipline of being able to read this out, because it's offering options. The scriptures offers lots of options. It shows you behind the scenes of the worst people on the face of the earth. It shows you behind the scenes of some of the best and some of the many of the rest. And it shows you the paths of life. You can choose paths of life. You can choose paths of destruction. You can choose paths of good and choose paths of evil. Like, you can choose any way you want to live. It lays it out here. It gives you the options of what's available. You know what? A little later. Thanks, love. She's offering me some scrumptiousness. I will take you up on that a little bit. Thank you. Now, the word is this thing that provides us a lamp of understanding. It's like the dads who sat down and desperately wrote their best lessons they could have ever given their son after they'd made all the stupid mistakes themselves personally. You know, it's like we don't volunteer. A lot of people don't volunteer for parenthood. I'm just saying. We know the risks, but we don't really know what we're getting into. Like, you don't really know what you're getting into until you're like well into it. You're well into it. And you know what? Then you're sitting there thinking about all the times I wish I'd learned more or paid attention more when it came to raising a family. Like, you got to know some of these things, like invaluable life skills that you definitely need to know as a family. Like how to navigate teaching each other, educating each other, school, balance, naps, sleep, waking, driving, shopping, cooking, cleaning, laundry, like all those complexities that you got to navigate when you're a singleton. You don't even have to think about this stuff. But they're critical ways of like, how are we going to raise our family? We can choose how we're going to raise our family. Literally at the origin point of their lives, we can be like, we're embarking on a lifestyle that's going to look like this. And it's going to shape their future. Like, it's going to shape their future. And so it's wise to recognize your deficiencies of wisdom and to seek those that have wisdom before you. For me, this is a wellspring of life for me. The scriptures have been a wellspring, a fountainhead of wisdom that I could go to drink of at any time throughout my life with all kinds of various stages of life I've been in when I needed different things in my life and an understanding. I needed answers to questions that were very different 10 years ago than I need answers to questions that I need today. It's a very unique living book, and I encourage you, consider it strongly, challenge you. For those of you that like a challenge, I challenge you to read it all the way from beginning to end, even the parts that don't make sense to you, even the parts that seem super exhausting or really brutal or really confusing. Like there's a benefit to be gained from diligently working your way from beginning to end of a book. Just something to consider. I've never finished the entirety of Carl's book. I have gotten hundreds of pages into it, and I will stop and I will jump to a totally different section. This book is one that is very valued when you go from beginning to end because it completes the narrative of a story, and it's powerful. Anyways, I'm going to get off my preach box for a second. Let's turn to the word. I just drove by some people that I've driven by a lot of people's properties over my life, and I've judged a lot of people that had lots of messiness with child's toys everywhere or trash or stuff everywhere. And then you have a big family and you realize how ridiculous it is to try to maintain all the stuff because I got an 18-month-old baby that picks something up, toddler that picks it up and just wanders 75 yards, 100 yards and just sets that thing there. And that's that there, And it's like, but he could do that 15 times. He could do that for an hour. Just do little trips and he'll shuffle an entire pile of stuff, completely relocate it, and you're like, that's just one of them. I have a second twin. I got a backup. You know what I'm saying? He's got a reload that she'll do the same thing and somewhere else, you're losing. That's just two of my children. I got two more that could be doing the same thing at any given time with even greater speed and rapidity because they're more dexterous. You can lose the war fast, son. So now when I drive around and I see people's lives, man, I'll tell you, I've been way less judgmental than I've ever been in my life. I have been humbled greatly. And it's so good for us. It's good for us to be empathetic and be able to understand what people's lives are like. And it's very difficult. And those seasons in life where it's busy and chaos and brutal and struggling and awesome and days and blur, just go for the ride, bros. You dads that are out there just doing your dad thing, doing your best to be a dad and not just the warrior monster kind of guy you used to be, or just the exhausted, miserably depressed, lonely guy. All those things where you're trying your best, man. I just applaud each and every one of you moms and dads who are doing your diligence to try to raise up children well. It is not easy, and I don't condemn or throw rocks at any of you for the choices that y'all are having to make out there. Every one of us has different situations, and I'm pondering a lot of that lately. I see the pressure cauldron that people are under, and we are being assaulted by incredibly efficient enemies, and it's tough. It's tough. So just know that I care for you guys and I love you, and I just want to share encouragement with stuff that's encouraging me. And for me, this is the words that transform my life. These are the things that gave me hope in seasons of my life where I was riddled with despair and learned helplessness, convinced I could not get out of it. These are the words that I turned to way back then, that now years later into my life, I'm able to turn to again and be able to drink of new waters and new relief and new strength, to be born again, to be given a new heart, We're going to get there. We're going to jump in at verse 9. That is also why we, from the day we first heard, have not ceased praying for you and asking that you would be filled with the knowledge of his desire in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, to walk worthily of the Master, pleasing all, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of Elohim, being empowered with all power according to the might of his esteem, for all endurance with patience and joy, giving thanks to the Father, who has made us fit to share in the inheritance of the set-apart ones in the light. This is part of the inheritance. Just zoom in for a second. He's talking about when we're walking in this body of believers, when we start to enter into our relationship and be in a covenant with him and start to transition our life out of the power of the kingdom of darkness, from this different lifestyle that we once had. The old man starts to die off and we start to embrace this new identity of who we are. He's telling us there's a promised inheritance that's given to us. Imagine try to consider being a child raised in a household where there's going to come a day where such a massive inheritance is going to be given to you that you could change the world with it. Like you actually had the power, like the world order people were talking about. Like we just need power. Fully committed. What was the way he said it? He said, all that's required is a task of sound knowledge of social engineering, a clear sight of the intended goal, and power. They're like, we can engineer the society in this totally different direction. Having massive power to be able to change the physical nature of things or the spiritual nature of things, like through the way that you live your life and the choices you make, is massive and should not be ever underestimated. And when we look out at the lives of people that make a commitment to follow the way, and we don't recognize the power of the decision that they've made and the daily decision they made and the continual walk that they have and how it impacts the lives of the people around them, but the world around them, is powerful. And he says that's because what comes with the terms of conditions is this inheritance that is promised to us as we walk in his ways, as we commit to follow him. This is the stuff he promises us. Listen, he has delivered us from the authority of darkness and transferred us into the reign of his Son of love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, who is the likeness of the invisible Elohim, the firstborn of all creation. Because in him were created all that are in the heavens and that are on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or rulership or principalities or authorities, all have been created through him and for him. And he is before all, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the assembly, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that he might become the one who is first in all. Because in him all completeness was pleased to dwell, and through him to completely restore to favor all unto himself, whether on earth or in the heavens, having made peace through the blood of his stake. And you were once estranged and enemies in the mind by wicked works, but now he is completely restored to favor in the body of his flesh through death, to present you set apart and blameless and unreprovable before him, if indeed you continue in the belief, founded and steadfast, and are not moved away from the expectation of the good news, the gospel, which you heard, which was proclaimed to every creature under the heavens, of which I, Shaul, became a servant, who now rejoice in my sufferings for you, and fill up in my flesh what is lacking in Messiah's afflictions, for the sake of his body, which is the assembly. As I've said to you before, part of the riches of what is attained is sufferings in this life. That is one of the best things we can ever have come into our life as part of the testing in order to prove what is in us is real or not real. Is it an illusion, or is it something that will stand the test of time? And this is why he gave as an example to try to articulate this without the confusing aspects of it. He said, look at a marriage. Look at a marriage. Over the course of its life, this is what a relationship with the Father, this relationship that we can have with him, becomes this commitment to him. But when it starts out, there's this fiery hotness, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like all new and everything's exciting. Like there's this just burn in the beginning, and then you enter in to the phases of reality over the first year or couple years. They call it the honeymoon phase. It's like 70% of marriages, more than 50% of marriages that end in divorce are going to end in divorce in the first 7 years. You know, like that's one of the biggest predictors of if a marriage is going to make it longer term. Okay. When people's relationships are tested through affliction, through sickness, through death, through suffering, through financial loss, through physical loss, when these things come into the life and test the marriage, the reflection becomes what comes out of them is what's been going into them. Does the marriage withstand? Does the relationship stand? Do people lay themselves down for their spouses and give themselves up for the needs of the family, right? Or is there self-seeking? Is there selfishness rooted in? Is there a envy and maliciousness? Is there lying and cheating and stealing? These things that dissolve the relationship. When these things are intact, you see the fruitfulness of like an awesome marriage. Like for those of you, even if you didn't have that with your parents, try to reflect on those that did. If you've ever seen it in your life modeled for you, it can impact you so much. My wife and I were really not eager to have children. There was a phase where we definitely wanted children, then we didn't really want children. And that was because I worked at a mental health facility that had very broken children. And it jacked me up to where I was like, I don't really want children right now. Like this, I'm seeing the worst version of what children often can become over and over and over again for like 12 hours a day. And it was just, it was brutal. But then we saw a family who had us over for dinner, like a husband and wife had us over for dinner. And they had an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old and like a 2-year-old. And we went to their house and their children were so genuinely well-behaved. They were like well-behaved, and they weren't just wild and chaos and rumbling around and jumping on their phones and just going nuts all the time. Like what came out of their mouth was like actual conversation, like conversations about things that like I could talk to them about without even thinking about. Like the daughter set the table. She knew how to set a table. Like that's manners. And an adult is always impressed by a child with manners. Like it's an automatic thing. It's like, I'm going to open up and have totally different interactions with the child that's well-spoken and able to communicate or have manners. Like totally different ways that an adult will treat you. One of the best skills you can treat your children is true manners, valuable. And as you teach them that and they get to practice it more and more, oh, it's so valuable. But anyways, this family had these awesome children. And they sat down and they had dinner. They cooked this beautiful meal. The child had written our names on like little plate, like little placards on each plate. It was awesome. And we ate this meal with them, and like it was respectful and polite. And yeah, there's still child noises. It's not like it was none of that. But there was a totally different respect in the air. There was like care. There was, and we were like, this is awesome. We got to talk with the parents and the children. The oldest daughter helped to get the other children when it was like time for bed to get ready for bed and got them into bed. And they like took themselves to bed at time, like reasonable. And I was like, this is wild. Like, what are we seeing? And I feel like I've been living in the safari, for so long around all the wild beasts, and like city children that were just very, very crazy all the time. And I've been around that kind of exposure for so long that I lost sight of what the authentic can be, like what a child can actually be, what an adult can be, what a marriage can be, what a family can be. And it created in my wife and I hunger for knowing what that would be like, just wanting to have that in our life. I have not modeled that perfectly. Please don't ever set me on a pedestal like I've crushed that. I've done my best though. That gave us an example of like, it's possible to have children that are like helpers. And I fundamentally believe one of the greatest antidotes to a global governing ideology that comes from this, and the inoculant to protect your family and your minds from this, is to have a cohesive family. To have a cohesive family, a righteous family that's equipped with an understanding about the mechanics of what is the kingdom of darkness and how do they operate, and what is it that I'm going to face when I go out the door on any given circumstance, and how do I navigate making wise decisions through that? How do I navigate finding my way through that minefield? When you can pass that on to your children, you're giving them such a head start. You're giving them such a boost, and it's amazing. And I've been renewing my gratitude for that, because now it's far enough into my life where I can start to see some of the fruit on the tree and see where we've done well and where we still need to do way better. And I'm beginning to realize the importance of impressing on my children these things. And so like the last, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, I got an opportunity to I'm picking 2 books out of the scriptures right now, and I'm just reading to my daughters 3 chapters a night. Just 3 chapters, sometimes more, because we get going and it's super fun. But like just diligently doing that just with my older daughters. It's hard when you try to do this with the twins around, it's kind of crazy. So it's never the same. But like when you just have time to do this with my daughters, I'm gleaning from it all this different stuff that I otherwise wouldn't get, and like part of that was this new heart. And this had been a prayer that came into my life a long time ago. And it's amazing to get to see how it kind of plays out. The book of Samuel. When I'm in doubt and I want to read like an awesome story to the children, I read 1st and 2nd Samuel, like default. Judges is another good one I do. It's like one of my favorite ones to read. The book of Acts is savage as well. These are like defaults for me, like go. We can find some savage epic stories in here. 1st and 2nd Kings is like that. 1st and 2nd Chronicles too. These are some savage ones. Anyways, we are reading in here. And one of my favorite lines is going on because they're electing a new king. We talked about this earlier when we were talking about finding a king that would rule and reign over them. And I talked about the warnings about that. The good, the bad, the ugly that comes from that. Oh no, I grabbed my wife's Bible. It's okay, it's not going to be highlighted. That's all right. Now check this out. Samuel, prophet, shalomi homie, kicking it, killing it out there. Prophesying all kinds of amazing things that are going to come to pass. Tells Saul, King Saul, not King Saul at the time, dude Saul, single man Saul, Shaul of Kish, right? He tells him, listen, your whole life's about to change forever. Yahweh has chosen you. You have been anointed to be the king over Israel. And they're like, what? He's like, you've been chosen. You're going to be the king. He's like, okay. And then he tells him all this stuff that's going to come to pass as he leaves this place. And he's got a whole new identity, right? Like, start of a new relationship. The father and you are never going to interact the same ever again. You're going to have a completely different relationship with him. You're going to be a completely different person. Your whole future is about to change forever. Defining moment of his life. Some of you are sitting smack dab in the middle of one of those, and you can choose right now, this day, exactly how redefining this moment is for your life. You can make a choice that forever impacts the rest of your future. This could be that moment for you. Saul was given something to help him to have that be successful. And this is what it says. And after that, it says, here's some bread. Hey, and you shall pass on from there and beyond, and shall come to the terebinth tree of Tabor. And 3 men going up to Elohim at Bethel shall find you there. One bearing 3 young goats, another bearing 3 loaves of bread, and another bearing a skin of wine. It's all good food, man. Whole food ingredients, you know what I'm saying? After that, go to the hill of Elohim where the Philistines... and they shall greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread, which you shall accept from their hand. And after that, go to the hill of Elohim where the Philistines' watchpost is. And it shall be, when you've come there to the city, that you shall meet a group of prophets coming down from a high place with a stringed instrument, and a tambourine and a flute and a lyre before them, and prophesying. And the Spirit of Yahuwah shall come upon you, and you shall prophesy with them, and be turned into another man. And it shall be, when these signs come to you, do for yourself as your hand finds to do, for Elohim is with you. And you shall go down before me. Oh, I just love that. For Elohim is with you. Hold on. And later on, I'm going to read to you where it came to pass. It's so awesome. Check this out. Oh, it's so good. I don't want to miss it. Oh, I'll just read a little further on. Oh, it's right here. And it came to be when he had turned his back to go from Shemuel that Elohim gave him another heart. And all those signs came on that day. He gave him another heart. Like, he gave him a transplant of a heart. He gave him a new heart, like a new being, a new power to rule over him, a new desire, changed who he was fundamentally in his nature. Now, other echoes of who Saul became still came out, some good, some horrifically bad. Like, what came out of him was ultimately there, but he was in this moment transformed. And this is like, people talk about born again. This is one of the best examples I actually find in the scripture of that phrase being used in real life. Like Samuel promising this is what's going to take place in your life. You're going to be born and to become a new man. Like Nicodemus talked about it too. But this is that moment where he's like, listen, you're going to become a new man completely. The old you is going to fade away and will become unrecognizable. And will fade to such an extent that you will put it to death. And you know what? When we take that understanding upon us and we start to orient ourselves to understanding what are his ways and how is it that he wants us to navigate this complexity of the changing world systems that are out there, he wants us to partner with him. He's like, listen, I'm calling you to partner with me, to be a part of my kingdom, to be my ambassadors, my representatives who go forth into the world and share the gospel of this message to the nations. Like he's encouraging us and calling us to do that. We don't have today in modernity people cheerleading that cause. We don't have a massive focused effort to try to advance that kingdom to the same extent as we have our enemies being propped up and launched and being fully capable and weaponized to destroy the very same foundation places of our lives, eradicating from us the things that give us humanity's experience as a whole. What has cohesed people together, stuck people together relationally, has been when people sat down and broke bread together, when people made food and they sat down and they ate that food together. When they were participating in that act, it is such a bonding thing that you may not perceive as the glue that's helping to hold a family together, but it certainly is. And when that very glue becomes poison, strategically built into it, toxic things. Now your food becomes a dread. The thing that was a blessing has become a dreadful thing, has become a torturous thing, has become something that is like evil, wrong, unbeneficial, toxic. When you have to look at it through those eyes, it changes, it poisons the dish. And it's like, if we can equip ourselves with an understanding of what's going on out there, take some time to diligently try to make decisive actions to move our family away from it, to move ourselves away from it individually, to move our friends and our families away from it. It's so beneficial because it has these massive, amazing ripple effects that sometimes are not noticed for years. Like, they are a long-term challenge. They are a long-term pursuit, a long-term effort. But by making these cohesive changes, we can totally see a different opportunity available to us. By people like Carl sneaking into these meetings, he was able to see firsthand what is actually going on behind the scenes with what I would say are the non-elected rulers. These are like the actual people who have an agenda that's adversarial to people living successful, capable, self-reliant lives. You're like a much more recognized way of devouring and colonially, empirically devouring the world and its resources. I studied a lot how Great Britain, for example, weaponized, and not just Great Britain, it was other countries involved too, but how opium specifically was weaponized to change a society and to demolish the most powerful nation in the world. Like, one of the better ways to kind of navigate and understand this was China, for instance. I'm going to go into some random history about China and opium wars and stuff like that for a minute. It's going to be tangentially weird and awesome. Hang in there. For some of you just are like stinking love history, and it's awesome. I get geeked out, son, when I find out a new pearl about history that I didn't really understand, something I need to scratch, like I got an itch on my back I can't scratch because that makes no sense, that kind of stuff. Anyways, I got a download about some of that recently. Part of that too is I'll study. Random book reference, Tragedy and Hope 101. Oh, I don't have the author. Need to get it. But anyways, understanding how empires and colonies devour the world. One of the main methods for this, okay, goes way back in time. China was one of the dynasties here, one of the emperors had changed the way that taxes were paid. Okay, it had massive ripple effects. Instead of taxes up until that point were paid to the king, like we read about earlier, where it was like, hey, you're gonna get a king Israel, they're gonna take a bunch of stuff from you. They're gonna exploit you guys of resources that are yours. They're no longer gonna be yours. You gotta give them to the king. He's gonna do whatever he wants with them, and you can't stop it. So those taxes were generally paid at the time in labor, in rice, in grain. And what was the other main one that was used? Rice and grain and one other. Livestock, okay? Meat. So that's kind of awkward logistically to try to get a uniformed code of how people are paid it out, all that stuff, right? So instead, one of the things that's utilized, he changes it so that silver is now the only commodity that can be exchanged, taxes can be paid with. Silver exclusively. So that creates this gigantic demand of silver. Boy, do they need a lot of silver. All the people that have been prepping silver are like, yes, finally, the currency is going to a silverback currency. It's going to be stinging payday, son. I get it, bro. I get it. Long-term holding of wealth. I understand. Anyways, grain's a good one too. Just saying. I'm biased. You can eat it. It's like a real thing. We went through a crazy crisis through the hurricane out here, and like cash was actually much more usable. Like, it was much more used. Gold is still one that has its place, but understand something, like readily available cash was 100% the only thing that was working by and far. Barter and stuff like that, that's definitely a thing with people who have nothing but the stuff that they have, right? Barter does take place, but it takes a while. It's just different, for what it's worth, in our country. Anyways, this demand for silver led them to open up their markets to trade in a way that they hadn't up until that time. And Spain at the time was crushing it in their conquest of Central and South America. They were raiding the silver mines, particularly in Peru, and finding the highest quality concentration of silver in any ground that had ever been found. So they had this gigantic amount of silver, and they started needing a buyer for it, right? So they're like, we need somebody to buy all this silver. Coincidentally, right at the time, China's like, we'll take it. We need it all. So it opened up to China to world trade on a scale that it had never had before. And China became exceedingly wealthy and powerful because it took in all of this silver. But over time, over generations, the trading of where they allowed ports that were open and available was very structured and very guarded, to where foreigners were not allowed to penetrate into the country and come into the country and just trade wherever they wanted. It was closed off. Japan did something similarly for a long time, well into modernity. Okay, other powers, colonial powers, wanted to crack that and have free access to the society to trade and influence it and take it over, right? No better colonizer existed at the time to do this than Britain. Ultimately, the way this was done was through a lot of this, the East India Trading Company. Far more than that. It was the largest corporation, had a standing army at times of 200,000. Massive power force, right? Incredibly capable people at taking over nation states. They came in and basically were like, listen, we got to find something that they want more than silver, because we don't want to always be bringing them silver. We want to bring them something else. Let's bring them opium and get them addicted to opium. And so this launched this entirely different addiction into the Middle East, into the Far East. And it saturated through the cities. And it produced, like, if you guys don't remember, it produces these side effects in people's lives that are not so beneficial long-term, right? Lots of problems, and it was eroding the fabric of their society, and it was destroying their society from within. And so the government made it illegal. They put a stop to it. They sent out an ambassador basically to shut off in the trading city. There was a 300-meter side of a river. That was where I believe the Pearl River. They were allowed to do their trade there. The merchants of the world were allowed to live and occupy in the city. No women were allowed to be there, no wives. They weren't allowed to travel. They all lived there. Well, they made them break open all the opium chests and dump it into the river and dump it into the sea and get rid of thousands of these chests of opium that they were bringing in. And we're like, we don't want this in our country anymore. Well, the next year they came back with an armada and they literally laid siege to China. And they're like, none of that. And the queen had some rules, and the king, they had some ideas about how we're going to run the show now. And you're going to secede to us territory, right? Like Taiwan. They're like, you're going to give us, or Hong Kong, you're going to give us this island. This is going to be ours, like, period. And we're going to be able to do any kind of trade that we want out here, and you can't take it from us. And they're like, what the heck? Some gangsters just rolled through here, took an island from us, and apparently we got to do whatever they say or they're going to blow us apart. Like, call it armed robbery, strong arm robbery in other places. But the way that they did it was destroying the culture, destroying the family unit. Drugs is the weaponized tool that has been used by colonial empires to eradicate the natural innate defense mechanisms that have been built in through tradition, through livelihood and culture. They want to shatter that. And once they do that through these drugs. And that's why they've seen it in our food, in our medicine, in our air, in our water, like this overarching just destruction of our body's natural ways has been so highly effective. And it's a strategy that was very successful, and they were able to crack open the nut of China and get them to let them to come in and start trading all throughout it. And then they got them hooked into a financial obligatory payback system where they had loans and they had to make payments, war debts, got them into the debt slavery. And then they took over this country piece by piece until they became an unrecognizable empire to what they were. But you can see now there's this shifting as that nation is changing and figuring out how to modernize and how to play in the game of the new system. You're seeing this massive power play shifting back to the East in a very different way. And they have a super force of different types of goods and resources and supply chain and logistics that's incomparable anywhere else in the world. So many of the trades and the factories and the skills and the artisans are still there, whereas we've outsourced it. And we've been left with this neutered country ripe for the harvest, And so I share these things so that you guys can have an understanding of the methods that we're seeing that are being played out against us, from a simple cup of coffee that we buy at the store at a Starbucks and you go to drink and put into your body. Like, you can go get a Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee looking thing, and half of that thing is a processed form of sugar that causes problems in the body. We're living in a time of quite an onslaught of minds out there that you've got to learn to navigate. And you are so much better equipped when you can do that with tactfulness, with wisdom, and then with the freedom that comes from it, by being able to think clearly, by having that sober mind, by having a a body that's not in distress all the time. It's so beneficial. And I just want to cheer you guys on that are trying to make those beneficial steps for your health and for your bodies, for your spiritual health, your physical health. And I just want to encourage you guys that are on that path, you gals that are devoting yourselves to it. Don't grow weary in doing it. Those of you that are young who are battling those things early on and those addictions and the things that are just so good at capturing your attention, like they've been playing on these addiction wars to destroy mankind and make us slaves for a long time. But listen, there is this amazing, marvelous world out here that's hiding behind the real screens. Like there is a complexity of beauty inside every little pocket square foot of acre of nature that you could ever get to learn and study. There's so much amazing information hiding on these pages of books that are being overlooked and disregarded, that if we can pick it up and read it with discipline, we can glean from it all kinds of information that is not given to us freely when we do a Google search. We have to be disciplined at seeking out that information. Yeah, I love living in neighborhoods where you hear gunshots. You know what I'm saying? It's the kind of neighborhood where it's likely an animal died, not a person. That's the kind of neighbors you want. I'm just saying. I like that. You don't have to precondition the neighborhood with firecrackers all the time in case you do have to go hot and do a little home defense style. Anyways, I just want to applaud you guys that are on that quest. Keep at it, y'all. Stay vigilant out there. Pick up the books, y'all. I just want to spur you on for it. Even if it's an audiobook, I get it. I like audiobooks a lot. I like them a lot. I like to record them now. I'm trying more and more diligently to do that. That's one of my big goals. I'm trying to put that out there. You guys can try to help hold me accountable. That's one of the goals I try to aspire to for this next season. Our lives have made a major change, and we're trying to figure out what can we do to be most masterful with the time that we have been entrusted with every single day, because we want to be productive for the people that are out there, for our beautiful, incredible people that watch and hang out here with us, and those that we get to interact with. Like you guys are our family from afar, and we do so appreciate you. We love hearing from you guys in comments and emails, phone calls even. Like, it's been terrific. We've gotten a body of like-minded people that we could have never hoped or dreamed for 8 or 10 years ago. These are those ripple effects that you just don't know what's going to happen if you just set out on a different course trajectory. But you know what? We have been blessed to find a new brotherhood and sisterhood of believers, of people that are on a different road. And it's been terrifically fun. It's been a challenge, and it's been awesome. But I appreciate you guys for going on this journey with me. As always, I do love you guys so much. I appreciate you and the hard work you guys are doing out there. Know that you're cared for, you're loved, and I appreciate all that you do for us and the support that you send. Also, if you are somebody that recorded an audio scripture, you memorized a chapter from the scripture, and you are trying to get that scripture challenge, you send me a video of you doing it, and I'll send you a sweet knife. If you're somebody who has done that and sent me that previously, but you heard from me or you did not hear back from me, will you please send it again? Because sometimes I can get a massive influx. But if it helps if you put scriptures challenge or something like that, or chapter for knife, something like that. Grab it. You know what I'm saying? It helps it be able to find it, because there's a lot that come in on any given basis. And some of you, I don't want to miss it. I'm getting better at being more organized about it. But I know there's a couple that I missed recently, and I cannot find your emails. And I was going to send you a knife, and I was waiting for your address. Send it to me, because I want to make sure you guys get something spicy. You need a sharp weapon, a sharp tool, a very sharp tool, because you're putting a sharp tool. You're writing something on your heart. You don't even know the gems you're going to get out of it. You know what I'm saying? You write that word on your heart. You don't know what you're going to get, but it's a lamp to your feet. It doesn't run out, It's like a tritium flashlight. Like this little guy on my belt, the beta light. It doesn't run out. Well, 10, 15 years, it's gonna get dimmer. But I'm saying, he's like, you store up this word in your heart. You got a light to your path. You can shine through the darkness of deceit, and you can understand where are you going. You can find dead reckoning. You can find your way to north and get home. I love y'all. Talk to you soon.